Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this LinkedIn Live. Today, we'll be talking about the question of careers, career gaps, the question of skill gaps, talent gaps, and how to structure your career if you have taken a non traditional path. Today, I have with me Josianne Seydoux. Hi, Josie.
Hi, Dorothy. How are you?
I'm very good today. So, Josie, the idea for this LinkedIn Live developed when I was talking to you a couple of weeks ago, when you told me the story of your life. So, you have led a very interesting life with a lot of different stations. You speak a lot of languages. You're very skilled. You're very flexible. And we talked about what this means when you're looking for a job. And it led me to thinking about what it means in terms of what kinds of skills you bring to the job market and how they are perceived by potential employers. So the question is, with the traditional hiring processes, what happens when you come with a CV like yours? But before we actually talk about this topic, let's talk a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your journey through life.
Sure. I guess that, yeah, it makes sense to start to have kind of an idea of where I'm coming from. But yeah, this was actually a very good conversation. Sometimes you don't even think about it so much until you reflect in conversation with someone else that gives you a viewpoint. So my career is truly varied. I actually grew up in Switzerland and then partly in Canada. So I have both nationalities and went to school in both those countries. And also from a very young age, I was very much interested in languages. So I always tried to go on exchange years, which I did twice. So another language that I had by the age of 17 was Spanish.
Hmm.
So in the end, I realized this is something that I really enjoy, going different places. So when it came to, the point in time when I got to choose what I would study at university, I really wanted to study something that was completely that I would really enjoy. So I studied something that most people would consider not very useful for the job market. I, I studied Latin American and Caribbean studies and a minor in philosophy. And I chose that because from a very early age, at 16, I started working. So for me, work was always something that was part of my life from a very early age. And I knew I could make money and support myself. So when I looked at university, for me, it was completely about something that I very much enjoyed and that I knew I would finish because it was 4 hard years. You're young, you want to do other stuff. So for me, it was a focus that I really wanted to set on something that I enjoyed. So of course, people ask, like, what do you do with this kind of degree, right?
Hmm.
It doesn't seem so obvious. So most of my peers, they went on to either do a master. Some became teachers. Some went into journalism. Some went into international development. None of these avenues seemed interesting to me. So I kept on working, but mainly to fulfill my other goal, which was to travel. So for many years during my 20s, my main goal was to go travel for really long periods of time. I ended up doing that for about 3 years, not all in one piece, but on and off. So I have to say, in the first few years, my focus wasn't on the workspace and what career am I going to have. There wasn't really much of a long-term plan going on.
Hmm.
Nonetheless, I collected really, really interesting experiences along the way. And I have worked in lots of different places on different continents. I worked back in Switzerland. I worked in Canada for quite some time, and then also in Mexico. In Mexico, I actually ended up for 10 years because I also did part of my studies there, and I really enjoyed the country. I really enjoyed, social life there and everything. So I did end up staying for a whole decade.
Hmm.
And of course, at one point, it does become apparent to you that you need to maybe find jobs that have a better pay or that get you someplace or you can actually learn something while doing the job. So it was actually then in Mexico that I got into more interesting fields where I also stayed for several years. One
Hmm.
was law firms, international law firms, and the other was finance. So I spent quite some years doing that. It was a very interesting environment. also completely new to me. I didn't have any type of
Mhm.
background in it, or so it was very interesting learning on the job from people. And I guess that's kind of how you learn the best, just by being in a new environment, adapting, and having to come up to speed with your peers, right? Because most of these people that I worked with, they did study something in that direction. So it was always kind of a challenge in that sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then I came back to Switzerland, pandemic times, and this is how we ended up here.
Yeah. So your career journey, of course, is a bit atypical. You said yourself that in the beginning you didn't do what most people tell you to do, look for a job that pays well and where you have a career, but you focused on gathering experience. You traveled, you learned languages, you stayed in different places, which means you were exposed to many different cultures, which means you're good with different cultures. I assume you speak, I know you speak French and you speak English and you speak German, and I assume you speak Spanish since you worked
Yes.
and lived in Mexico. So you speak four languages at least. So basically, you have the dream background, I would assume, for every employer in a multicultural corporation to, to start a career. But did all this experience you gathered, all these years abroad, the traveling, the working, did that help you on the Swiss job market when you returned?
Actually, not so much. No, to be honest, it was one of the tougher job searches I'd done. In a way, I was lucky because I had already searched for new jobs in different fields previously.
Hmm.
So I had some, insights on how to structure my CV, how to talk to different people in different situations. So that was a plus. But at the same time, when you want to change everything, you want to change the field you're working in, you want to change the country you're working in. So it was a lot of factors that came into play. And then you add on top the pandemic that, complicated things a little bit further. It was actually extremely hard. I think I wrote over 150 applications to all
Hmm.
kinds of different sectors and different positions as well. Some that have seemed very interesting, some that were, I was like, well, at this point, I need any job, right? So it always is also kind of a question of supply and demand. And in that sense, it was actually really, really tough because most people would look at my CV and say, well, it doesn't exactly fit the bill, or
Hmm.
we can't recognize any job titles here that would match the ones we have in our company. And so that was actually quite a challenge, I have to say.
Yeah. I can imagine that this was problematic, and it's such a shame, really. And I'm really glad you ended up at Fortinet, and we got to get all your experience and all your talents and your skills on board here. But it takes me to a topic that I've been thinking about a lot in the previous weeks, and I'm not the only one, I think, because the talent gap is a big topic globally. So if you look at there's a really big global talent shortage. 3 in 4 companies have issues hiring people for roles. So this is the situation, and then there are people like you on the market who come from non-traditional backgrounds, and as you said, your CV doesn't necessarily fit a specific job role, and that's when the recruiter looks at your CV and says, no, not this person. And this is problematic in a situation where we're all constantly struggling to find the right people for the jobs, right?
Absolutely.
And I think your experience also jives with this, that employers are really skeptical about hiring people who don't have the same background they're used to. And I think this is what you experienced when you went into the hiring process, right?
Absolutely. Most people saw this as a huge challenge or something that I might not be able to overcome.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So now you and I were both in the tech industry, and research, and this is on the slide, and obviously this research was done by McKinsey. That research shows that 70% of people who work in this space started out in other occupations. So you might actually think that recruiters would understand that and make sure that they hire people even though they don't fit that exact description. But this is not what we're seeing. What do you think we have to change in the hiring process to make it better or more accessible for different people and help us close the skill gap?
I think they've started a little bit, but they're still very conservative in that sense. And I think it
Mhm.
also depends a lot on company culture, how much they're willing to also invest in their people. Because, of course, many jobs nowadays, you will not find anyone on the market that fits the exact description because it's such a dynamic place. You know, it's not, I think, and this will accelerate even more so in the future. I think a lot of the jobs that will exist in 5 years, we cannot even prepare people for at this point because we don't know what they're going to be doing. So I think it's actually really important that they start changing that whole mindset. What you want to look for is definitely much more in the skills that they bring to integrate into a team, to adapt
Mhm.
quickly, to be versatile, to learn something new, right? To not be resistant to change. These kinds of uh, topics will become much more important. But at this point, I think still many recruiters really, they just look at a page of paper or they look at a LinkedIn profile and they
Mhm.
very much go off experience rather than character. And I think character, that's something you can't train, but skills you can always train. So that's definitely a focus that needs to shift.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on something very important that we have to understand. The entire world and the way we work, the way we deliver goods, the way we consume goods, everything is changing very rapidly. And due to the rapid change, we will need people who are capable to change with that world. And I feel that people like you who have always been, been leading a life that has forced them to adapt, or whether or not you did it willingly or not, but you had to have this ability to adapt, to change, to acquire new skills, to learn a new language, to get to know new people, to work with different cultures. I think people like you are predestined to be successful in this kind of world. So I think we have to take a very close look at the way we structure our workplace, right? So we've talked about this a little before we did this LinkedIn Live, and there's a couple of things I think that companies have to look at, and one of them, and I think one of the most important thing, is being able to upskill people. So whether it's someone from a non-traditional background who brings a certain set of skills that is super useful and then just needs like one or two new skills, or if it's someone within the company, reskilling, upskilling is one of the most important tasks our companies face in the future, I think. The other thing is, we have to look at the job descriptions and redesign workflows, role designs, because with the shifting of our world, the roles that have to be filled also shift. So it doesn't make sense to just, dump a list of skills that you're supposed to have for the way the role looked in the past 10 years, just dump them in a job description and hope to find someone. We have to take a very, very close look on how our jobs really look at the moment, how they will change in the future, and what kind of mindset we need in people to fill these roles. And also, I think another thing that is really important is the ability to learn, and I think culture fit. Hiring for culture fit and for passion, and you talked about this earlier. You said you can learn skills, but you cannot learn, the mindset. I think that's so important to understand. So taking this back to your journey, you have, and I know this because I've been working with you on different things in the last weeks. I know you have this mindset of learning, of doing new things, of doing them perfectly. So if you think about your career, so currently you are the office manager at the Fortinet Swiss office, right? But thinking about your career, where do you think your skills would be best used? If you could just dream.
I wonder who's listening.
Oh,
I have to adjust my answer wrong. No,
no.
jokes aside, it's it's definitely really interesting. Now that I've been here at Fortinet for about 2 years, what I definitely enjoyed a lot is also exploring the whole company, not just sticking
Mhm.
to, like what's happening here at the office and the teams that I get to work with here, which is very cool. But I think when you work at a global company, it's also interesting to learn about the complete set of what makes up this company. And we're all over the world. We're now over 12,000 people. So I got really interested in gaining a better understanding of the whole company, how it works, who is who, how it's set up. And I think that's one thing that always really interested me: governance, how a company is set up, and what kind of positions you might need in the future, because our pace of growth is so massive if you compare it to other
Mhm.
kinds of industries. It's definitely a company where you have tons of opportunities, things that don't exist today, they will exist in 2 years or 5 years time, and it's something that you can grow with. So I think it's something that's very motivating, and the more you know about your environment, the more you also know where you could be useful. So I think
Yeah.
that's been really good, being able to connect with peers all across the regions. I just this morning I talked to people from Australia, and you get to be in touch with tons of people around the globe, which kind of ties back into my need for being in an international environment. So I think that is definitely one thing that I'm looking into, and that maybe not everybody's interested in, but for me that's definitely a direction I'm very
Yeah.
interested in, and probably pursuing something in that direction.
It's so interesting because everything you said just now just shows how well you fit into this multicultural international environment. And that's not true for everyone, obviously. I mean, um, a lot of us, we come into this jobs and we just fill our role. That's what I do mostly. I fill my role as a system engineer manager and I take care of my people. And that's what I do. And but when I look at the way you approach things, is you always try to think outside of the box, do a little more. Networking is actually a big topic. The ability to network well is also something that will help us, building our jobs in the future. So it's very impressive that you actually do this naturally, because not everyone does. And it's probably a reflection of the way you lived in the past years. But coming back to what you said about learning and changing and all these things, we
Mhm.
both met through an initiative which is around talent development, obviously. And I think that's such an
Mhm.
important topic, especially when it comes to filling the talent gap. Because one thing is the thing with the how do we actually find people with the right mindset, the right passion for doing things, for changing things, and envisioning different solutions for problems. But the other thing is, when we have them in the company, how do we keep them, right? So
Absolutely.
we talked about this as well, obviously, and I think one part of the talent gap and how to fill it and how to make sure it stays filled is to build these processes around talent development on to make sure you're able to coach and develop people within the company to make them stay in the company. So I think, just as I just asked you, what do you want to be if you could envision? We have to ask people what they want to accomplish and where they want to develop to, and that has to be open. So unlike these traditional career ladders where you knew, okay, this is the first step, second, third, and so forth. I think we need to be open to people pivoting into other positions, into other parts of the company, opening it up for them, and not thinking so much about, okay, this is a technical person, so he has to be in a technical stream, or this is, I don't know, an office manager, she has to be kind of an office manager on an office manager track. But thinking about, for example, okay, this is Josie, she has all these abilities, she's good at networking, she's good at talking to people, she is good at listening to people, she is outgoing, maybe she is a good sales manager, maybe she could be an account executive, just opening up the whole thing, so everyone has the ability to develop into a place where they fit best, because we don't always know at a certain point in our career what is best, right?
Absolutely,
or,
that's very true.
or like you, we just kind of we just pop up in a place because of what happened before we even came into the company. So yeah, I think filling that talent gap is also very much about reinforcing learning and how important that is, something you do on a daily basis. And yeah, and that will help us to retain people in the company. So
Absolutely.
coming back to your journey, because I find your journey so interesting. I mean, what else did you learn from coming, taking this untraditional path? We talked about, languages. We learned about flexibility. But what else do you bring to the table? And what do you think people like you bring to the table?
Well, my absolute one word answer to that is resilience. And
Yes.
that's and that's a really good thing to have because I guess it's something that when you're presented with a situation where you feel like, well, there is no solution to this, or we can't do anything about this right now, you realize that you become a lot more resourceful, or looking, like you said, looking outside of the box for other options, because you didn't always have the natural options. For example, I never got a job through a recommendation or because my uncle worked at a company or something like this, right? So if you don't have the traditional avenues of getting jobs, or you also stay in jobs for 10 years, like, because for me, my nature always wants me to go and explore more and find something else. I think what you really, really get out of it at the end is resilience, because you
Hmm.
become a lot more resistant to, when somebody tells you it can't be done, you go and try anyway, because you have that spirit a bit more, because you have proven it time and time again, right? Many people might think it's impossible, or it's really hard, or that you will have huge setbacks, which you do. I've definitely had that happen, where I feel like I made a bad decision and now I'm paying for it, but that doesn't mean it's the end of the road, right? You pick up your things and you go and you try again. So I think that's definitely something that's also
Hmm.
a skill that I acquired without actually planning for it. Believe me, it wasn't my plan. But in the end, it brings you such a positive side that you can take, yeah, take another
Yeah.
stab at it and try again.
Absolutely. And I think resilience is one of the most important thing in a world that is constantly changing. And of course, I think resilience is also a product of having been in many different situations and tried many different things. Many people think that resilience is just, like a character trait that you have or you don't have, but it's not just that. It's also, going through a lot of situations, learning how to cope with changes, with problems, finding solutions. If you do it again and again and again, you develop a skill for it, obviously. And I think if I look back at the last 3.5 years, I think what got most of us through it was some form of resilience. And some people struggled more than others because they didn't have this background of solving problems, solving difficult situation, having to go through issues again and again and again. So yeah, I think that this is not going away, and I think that our companies can deeply profit from people who have the skill to find solutions, to be resilient in the face of adversity, basically. And that also brings me to a book that I read, which I really recommend to everyone. It's called Generalists. And damn, I forgot the title. Sorry. I'm going to post it in the comments under the recording later. But it's very much about the fact that generalists are actually much more successful in solving problems that people who have like this focused education often can't, because they bring an outside perspective to the problem. So I and it also talks about, when you don't come from a traditional background, you often worry that you will never catch up with the people in the field who already have this background. This is
Absolutely.
something we worry about. I mean, I still do it. I mean, I studied chemistry, as you know. I'm not a computer scientist, and I've all my career I've always had this feeling that I might not know enough, because everyone else had the study.
100%.
But it's not true. Actually, being someone who has done something else before helps you see, aspects of a problem that other people can't see. And I think that's something you also experience throughout. And I see it when I talk to you about things we do in the initiative, for example. You have a
Yeah.
way of looking at things that just shows that you have a different perspective.
That's true. But what you mentioned is actually a really important topic as well, because people generally that don't have a traditional career path, they struggle a lot more with self-doubt.
Hmm.
Or, for example, after you've written those 100 applications, you really feel so rejected that sometimes you really feel like you're not good at anything, right? So I think that's a very important topic to also mention. It isn't all just positives. Like, it's also a very tough position oftentimes to be in, because you have those hard times where you feel like you really doubt yourself so much because you seem to not tick the boxes, you don't fit into the right mold. And that sometimes is a complicated situation to be in when you get 100 no's.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's not just when you are a career switcher or you someone from a non-traditional background like you are. A lot of women report that they, especially when they work in male-dominated fields like tech, that they struggle with this, and even highly qualified women. So and I my experience is also that every time I switched jobs, I fell into that hole again. For the first couple of weeks I was wondering why they even hired me. So I must say that this job was the first one where I didn't have that, but I'm throughout my entire career I was wondering if I could make it at the beginning of the job. So I think it's important that we shift this whole perspective of, okay, this person has, I mean, we will always need specialists, we will always need people with very deep understanding of certain topics, but when it comes to the day to day of solving issues, of approaching new problems, thinking of new products and solutions, I think we will need more people like you and people who have this background of different fields to bring that information together and develop new solutions. Because we had this whole discussion about chat gpt in the recent weeks, and everyone's worried about, oh my god, the artificial intelligence will destroy our jobs. But I think this is something that is uniquely human, this ability to create something completely new out of different experience. So instead of destroying jobs, I think it just gives us the ability to, um, focus on the important things.
Absolutely.
So let's summarize what we talked about a little bit. So coming back to the talent gap and the job market, and the difficulties you had to find a job when you obviously have this wealth of experience and knowledge and skills. um, let's just maybe reiterate what you think has to change in the workplace and the hiring, and maybe also, when after you're hired.
It's hard to say where it needs to start, but I definitely think because the normal path is a hiring manager, first starts talking to HR, and then that's how they create a job opening. I think they have to think about it a lot more. Like, what do I actually need in this position? And sometimes when people revise those requirements, they realize that some are much more important than others. So, for example, we've had this happen here. So they focused so much on the experience part, where it was important that somebody had experience for years and years and years, but not so
Hmm.
much in that skill part, where you look for, have they been able to prove that they have those skills? That stuff you can find out in interviews or in assessments or things like that. But it's a bit of a different focus, a shift of focus, not to look for someone that has already done the same job, that has experience in the same field with the same job title, but more to focus on a cultural fit, a fit in the team, a fit with the client you're trying to gain, right? Like, it has to,
Hmm.
I think, just focusing on different kinds of metrics that you're
Yeah.
looking to fill with this position. I think that's definitely one of the first parts that needs to change. But of course, then you also have HR. HR has to also come along with us on this journey to understand that, yes, sometimes you might hire someone that doesn't exactly look like the perfect fit, but you have been able to prove that they are actually qualified and that they will do an incredible job because of X, Y, and Z, right? So I think
Yeah.
that needs to be a shift on both sides, the business and HR, for sure.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that you have different stakeholders in the whole thing. You have HR who just does their job, they get this skill profile and then they just go out and they just, do this. Okay, this is the person, this is the skill profile. They can't do anything else. It's not up to them to decide. Some
Mhm.
really try, to bring in different candidates, but often they struggle because there's no match between the CV and the job profile. And then there's the hiring managers, and hiring managers, I don't think that all of them understand, the difficulty that HR faces nowadays and on the job market, finding the right candidate. So getting those two together and really taking a deep dive into the role and what skills do we really need going forward. Of course, there will be technical skills, for example, when it comes to system engineering. But what else is important? Storytelling, active listening, communication skills, maybe presentation skills, maybe networking, and all these things. Maybe that's more important. But
Yes.
and this reminds me of something we've been doing. We went and had this personality profile review training, and looking at personality profiles of people might be super helpful for hiring the right candidates, even if they don't have all the programming languages or all the cybersecurity skills or whatever that is, right?
Absolutely. I think that gives you a really good insight into other qualities that they bring along to the job. And oftentimes those can even be more important than, yeah, a skill that can be trained within a couple of months. So that's
Yeah.
definitely true.
So that was the hiring process, and then the whole work experience after you've been hired. So I think, to reiterate that, maybe, what or coming back maybe also to this talent development initiative, what do you think are the most important factors that will keep people in your company, in your workplace?
I think it definitely has to feel like it's a thing that's alive, right? Like you have options, you have maybe not everybody wants to, have a different position every 2 years. Some people might be very happy in what they do, but
Hmm.
for it to stay interesting and for people to stay engaged and to feel like they're actually contributing something valuable, you have to give have it like an open space, right? Like, so if people do want to take up new initiatives, maybe have exchanges with different departments or have
Hmm.
teamwork outside of the regular teams, which is how we met, right? For example, I thought that was one thing that is really cool because suddenly I was picked out of, oh, here's Switzerland, we need a participant. And then you really start to see the bigger picture and you meet other people and you gain new perspectives. And these kinds of things I think are really important within a company to offer that to the people, because I think that's what really makes them feel belonging or makes them feel that they're useful, which is usually what people nowadays look for in a job.
Hmm.
Not just what do we get paid, or can I leave at 5?
Yeah.
It's much more of the culture and how you get along with people. Are you involved in different things? Do you feel useful and do you feel like you belong in this place? So I think those are definitely two of the top priorities that they should be looking at.
Absolutely. And I think you've touched on two of the most important ones. And the one is belonging, making people feel they belong. And that, of course, entails that they have the chance to actually contribute something and that they're listened to, that they feel that they have the same voice as like everyone else. And then you talked about growth. And I think it's important what you said about, okay, that on the one hand, you need the possibility to develop maybe to another position, but not everyone wants that maybe. But growth can mean different things. I think the important part about it is that there is the possibility for growth and that you are asked how you want to grow. So yeah, definitely, making sure that the skills gap that we have and that will be around for the next years, definitely, because we don't have the strategies to find the people really quickly at the moment. I mean, I don't want to make a prognosis because things change rapidly, as we saw in the last couple of years. But with the tools we have now, we don't have the possibility to really close the skill gap in a short part of time. So to make sure that you keep the people you have and you keep them happy, I think, one of the things that captures it really well was this quote by McKinsey, which is in the paper I cited earlier. And it is providing the kind of experience and skill building that augments human capital can open up a much broader pool of candidates. So Of course, this is from the perspective of the employer, but I think the other side of the coin is if you have this experience that you are, valued, that your skills are built, that you are seen as not necessarily human capital, that sounds very McKinsey, but you're seen as a valuable asset to the company, then
Yeah.
um, your wish to stay in the company will definitely be stronger than if you feel, well, I'm just a means to make money for the company and nobody cares about me. So yeah, I think there's a couple of things that are really have to change in the workplace, and one is the whole hiring process, how we look at candidates, how we evaluate what they bring to the table, that we give more space to people who bring skills that we don't immediately see in the traditional hiring descriptions. And I'm really thinking of you because I feel that you have so much to bring to the table, and I really feel there's so much more that Fortinet can profit of, those skills that you have brought. I mean, you're doing so much that we are already profiting anyway, but I think there's so much growth potential in people like you. And I want to thank you for taking time to tell us your story and, and your experiences and your thoughts on the matter. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you. It was a really big pleasure. Also, I'm happy to be part of the group and that I got to meet you and have these conversations. That's definitely one of those things that are rewarding and make it all worth it for sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Josie. And thank you, everyone, for listening. I would really love to hear your thoughts about the whole topic of the talent gap, of the skills gap that we have on the market at the moment, and what you think might be good tools to close that gap, and what you think we should change in the hiring process. Thank you all for joining, and have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.